Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We're here in docket number 2022-2-E. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner J. Williams, Commissioner Caston, Commissioner C. Williams, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Powers, and Vice Chair Belzer. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioner Urban. Council?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We call our third panel of Mark C. Furtick and James W. Neely.
Gentlemen, when you're ready, if you could raise your right hands for me. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Thank you. Mr. Furtick, could you please state your name for the record, please?
Mark C. Furtick.
And by whom are you employed and what capacity?
I'm currently employed by Dominion Energy South Carolina as the Renewable Energy Programs Advisor.
And did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 11 pages of direct testimony that was pre-filed with the Commission on February 7th, 2022?
Yes.
Did your pre-filed direct testimony include any exhibits?
No, it did not.
And do you have any changes or additions to your direct testimony?
Yes. The balance of avoided costs reported on page 3, line 17 of my direct testimony should be amended from $8,193,806 to $8,193,729.
Thank you. And if I asked you all the questions contained in your pre-filed direct testimony subject to that correction here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I move the pre-filed direct testimony as corrected of Mr. Furtick be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed direct testimony, corrected version of the testimony of Mr. Mark C. Furtick will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Furtick, have you prepared a summary of your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I have.
Will you please present the summary to the Commission at this time?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. My testimony presents the performance and cost associated with the company's distributed energy resources programs during the review period of January 1, 2021 through December 31, 2021, and provides the DER program cost projections for the forecast period of January 1, 2022 through April 30, 2023. The company first implemented DER programs in docket number 2015-54E, in which the Commission determined that these programs would result in the development of approximately 42 megawatts of utility-scale renewable energy facilities sized between 1 and 10 megawatts and approximately 42 megawatts of customer-scale renewable energy facilities sized 1 megawatt and smaller. The DER program cost at the end of the review period was $1,206,003 in over-collected avoided cost and $8,193,729 in under-collected incremental cost. For the period January 1, 2022 through April 30, 2023, the company projects that DER program costs will include $9,872,994 in avoided cost and $25,580,103 in incremental cost. These avoided and incremental costs include the avoided and incremental costs associated with the company-approved DER programs, including offering utility-scale DER programs, offering customer-scale net energy metering incentives, performance-based incentives, and bill credit agreement programs, and offering the company's community solar program. These costs also include general and administrative expenses directly resulting from offering DER programs to the company's customers, such as information technology system enhancements, revenue grade meters, marketing and education expenses, and the incremental labor required to support the programs and increased volume of customer inquiries. Company witness Alan Rooks provides these cost components in his testimony. As to its utility scale DER goals, the company reported in 2018 that 9 solar farms totaling 48 megawatts have been interconnected, and therefore the company achieved the 1% goal for utility scale facilities as set forth in Act 236 in 2017. To accomplish its customer scale DER goals, the company offered its non-residential customers the bill credit program and also offered residential and non-residential customers a new retail net energy metering program, NEM 2.0. In Order 2019-392, the Commission approved the company to offer NEM 3.0, which eliminated the 2% NEM threshold and made net energy metering available to customers who applied for it from May 17, 2019 through May 31, 2021. Order 2019-392 also authorized the company to close NEM 2.0 effective May 4, 2019. The company's bill credit program had 108 customers totaling 19.21 megawatts in generating capacity participating as of December 31, 2021. The company also offered residential customers participating in NEM 2.0 a performance-based incentive. The available performance-based incentives were fully reserved, with 1,037 of the NEM 2.0 residential customers receiving the incentive as of December 31, 2021. As of December 31, 2021, the total cumulative NEM generating capacity provided by the 12,234 net metering customer generator facilities on the company's system was approximately 100.98 megawatts. The company's 16 megawatt community solar generating facilities make available the option for customers to either purchase or subscribe to their energy output as a credit on their bills. As of December 31, 2021, 158 low-income accounts, 882 residential accounts, and 47 church, school, or municipal accounts have either purchased or subscribed in the company's 3 community solar facilities. The remaining 0.077 megawatts of capacity is reserved for low-income customers and is filled via a separate wait list of low-income customers. In sum, the company respectfully requests that the Commission approve the company's cost incurred in providing DER programs during the review period as being reasonable and prudent, and find that the company's fuel purchasing practices were reasonable and prudent for the review period.
Thank you, Mr. Furtick. Mr. Neely, could you please state your full name for the record?
James W. Neely,
Thank you. And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Dominion Energy Services as an energy market consultant.
Did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 19 pages of direct testimony pre-filed with the Commission on February 7th, 2022?
Yes, I did.
Did your pre-filed direct testimony include any exhibits?
It did not.
And do you have any changes or additions to your direct testimony?
I do not.
If I asked you all of the questions contained in your pre-filed direct testimony here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I move the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Neely be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. James W. Neely will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Neely, have you prepared a summary of your pre-filed direct testimony?
I have.
Will you please present it to the Commission at this time?
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. My testimony is to discuss the 11 components of value for distributed energy resource avoided costs contained in the net energy metering methodology used by the company and approved by the Commission in Order number 2015-194, issued in docket 2014-246-E, and in Order number 2021-569, issued in docket number 2019-182-E. The Commission has approved 11 components of value for net energy metering distributed energy resources of avoided cost, line losses, avoided capacity, ancillary services, transmission and distribution capacity, avoided criteria pollutants, avoided CO2 emission cost, fuel hedge, utility integration and interconnection cost, utility administration cost, and environmental cost in order to achieve the total value of distributed energy resources. The company calculated the value for each component in the current period and the value over the 20-year planning period. The difference between these two columns of numbers represents the future benefits of distributed energy resources that are subject to recovery by the company pursuant to Commission Order 2015-194 and South Carolina Code Section 58-40-20. I will briefly summarize the company's valuation for each component. The component of value for avoided energy costs are based on the PURPA avoided cost values with an adjustment to remove the cost of criteria pollutants and environmental costs, which are then reflected in the components for avoided criteria pollutants and environmental costs. For avoided energy costs, the current year value is $0.03024 per kilowatt hour, and the 20-year value is $0.03878 per kilowatt hour. For avoided capacity, the company calculates a value of $0.00034 per kilowatt hour for the 20-year planning horizon pursuant to the Commission Directive in docket 2021-88-E. There are no capacity needs until 2028, therefore the current period value is zero. Ancillary services refer to the need to balance the load and generation on the system and include operating reserves, spinning reserves, non-spinning reserves, frequency regulation, and voltage control. Customer generators do not provide ancillary services for compensation from electric utilities. As a result, the current period and the 20-year period has a value of zero. As to the current year avoided transmission and distribution capacity, the company's distributed energy resources do not avoid transmission or distribution capacity, so the value of this component is zero. The 20-year avoided transmission and distribution costs have a value of $0.001838 per kilowatt hour. In making this calculation, the company identified the average annual transmission and distribution cost in the 5-year budget that could be avoided. The company also determined the average annual 20-year load growth. The calculation requires application of an economic carrying charge to distribution cost and transmission costs, with that charge adjusting the annual fixed charges for inflation as applicable. Even though the company is applying a T&D avoided cost, it should be noted that the company has filed its plan for improving its ability to provide T&D avoided cost that considers T&D capacity associated with customer generator facilities. Pursuant to Commission Order 2015-194, the component value for avoided CO2 is set at zero until state or federal laws or regulations result in an avoidable cost on the utility system for these emissions. DESC does not hedge fuels for electric generation. Therefore, the cost and also the value of the fuel hedging is zero. Pursuant to Commission Directive issued in docket number 2021-88-E, the component of value for the utility integration and interconnection charge is set to $0.0018 per kilowatt hour. The utility administration costs of distributed energy resources are being collected through a distributed energy resource rider, which is added to the fuel clause. Therefore, the value of this component is zero. The component of environmental costs refers to any appropriate environmental related costs that were not already included in other net metering methodology components. The avoided cost for these materials typically is included in the company's avoided energy costs, but these costs have been separated out in this proceeding and is $0.00015 per kilowatt hour for the current period and $0.00011 per kilowatt hour for the 20-year period. The valuation for line loss component for the current period is $0.00234 per kilowatt hour and $0.03208 per kilowatt hour for the 20-year period. When a distributed energy resource serves a customer's load behind their meter, or when it puts power into the distribution system, the company avoids the energy required to bring the power to the customer's meter or the distribution system, and the line losses associated with delivering power across the system. The loss factor used for these values represents the estimate of cumulative marginal line losses at a residential customer's meter. In Commission Order 2021-569, the Commission modified the existing methodology to require that electric utilities determine the marginal line losses associated with customer-generated facilities. The company filed its plan to capture line losses associated with customer-owned distributed energy resources. DESC respectfully requests that the Commission approve the calculation of the total value of net energy metering distributed energy resources as set forth in my testimony. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony.
Thank you. Mr. Neely, did you also prepare? There we go. Thank you, Mr. Neely. Did you also prepare or cause to be prepared under your direction 10 pages of rebuttal testimony that was pre-filed with the Commission on March 24th?
Yes, I did.
Did your pre-filed rebuttal testimony include any exhibits?
It did not.
And do you have any changes or additions to your rebuttal testimony?
No, I did not.
If I asked you all the questions contained in your pre-filed rebuttal testimony here today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, at this time I move the pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. Neely be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed rebuttal testimony of Mr. James W. Neely will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. And Mr. Neely, have you prepared a summary of your pre-filed rebuttal testimony?
I have.
Will you please present it to the Commission at this time?
Yes. My rebuttal testimony responded to certain matters raised in the pre-filed direct testimony of R. Thomas Beach, witness for the South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. Witness Beach does not challenge the company's current year or 20-year levelized values for the components of avoided energy cost, ancillary services, avoided criteria pollutants, utility administration cost, and environmental cost in the distributed energy resources value stack. As to Witness Beach's claim that the avoided energy cost component of net energy metering should be differentiated on a seasonal and temporal basis, the company has delayed implementing the temporal and seasonal data because the periods for avoided energy costs should be synced with the temporal and seasonal periods for transmission and distribution avoided costs, as described in the company's T&D narrative and marginal line loss plan filed November 17, 2021. The development of the T&D narrative and marginal line loss plan being undertaken by the company will not be completed until the end of 2023. The Commission should note that despite his claim, Witness Beach ultimately did not contest DESC's calculated value of avoided energy cost for the current period or the 20-year levelized period. Therefore, Witness Beach's claims have no impact on the calculation of the avoided energy cost component. Witness Beach's claim for capacity contribution of 26.5% based on an average of the gross and net load methodologies is misplaced. Using an average of the value of the first megawatt with the last megawatt artificially inflates the current value. The first megawatt added to the system occurred years ago. The capacity value should be based on the current configuration of the system and represent the current avoided capacity value as done in the company's calculations. Witness Beach calculates the avoided generation capacity cost component for both the current period and the 20-year period. He does so because there is no Witness Beach miscalculates the avoided generation capacity cost component for both the current period and the 20-year period. He does so because there is no capacity to be avoided in the current period. In fact, there is no capacity to be avoided until 2028, when it is assumed that 1,294 megawatts of coal generation is retired. For the 20-year period, the difference in revenue requirements method used by the company and approved by the Commission accurately calculates a value of $87.73 per kilowatt year. The peaker method that Witness Beach proposes overstates the system avoided capacity value. Witness Beach includes replacement of CT units in his avoided capacity calculation. That is incorrect. These units should not be used in the calculation because these units are in-kind replacements that are not intended to provide additional capacities. These units have critical and reliability functions that customer generators cannot replace. Second, these replacement units are not avoidable. Witness Beach claims that the company arbitrarily segmented T&D cost. T&D costs have multiple purposes, and the company accurately segmented costs into groups that have a primary reliability or primary load growth function. T&D costs with a primary reliability function should not be included in the T&D avoidable cost. Witness Beach's method for computing DESC's T&D marginal cost is incorrect in establishing avoided transmission capacity costs related to load growth. Specifically, Witness Beach uses all transmission costs between 2009 and 2020 from FERC Form 1, and again, all costs from the T&D investment growth plan from 2021 to 2025. These values include costs that are not related to load growth, but include safety, grid hardening, and modernization, life cycle replacement, and repair. As a result, his regression analysis computes a relationship in the growth of all transmission costs relative to load growth, not costs associated with only load growth. This error by Witness Beach results in a significant higher estimate of avoided T&D costs that are overstated because he includes costs in his calculation that are not related to load growth and are not avoidable by distributed energy resources. Witness Beach's request to quantify the value for avoided CO2 in the 20-year period violates the clear instruction in Commission order that the component of value for avoided CO2 is set at 0 until the state or federal laws or regulations result in avoidable costs on utility systems for these emissions. Currently, there are no state or federal laws or regulations restricting the emission of CO2 pollutants, so the value for CO2 pollutants is properly set to 0. The Commission should reject Witness Beach's claim to value distributed renewable generation as equivalent to fuel hedging. The company does not hedge fuels for electric generation. Therefore, the cost and the value for fuel hedging is 0. Fuel diversity is valuable and important, but fuel diversity does not constitute a fuel hedging program. As the Commission found in order number 2021-569 on this same argument of Witness Beach, which states, a 0 value for hedging is reasonable and appropriate. The company does not hedge fuel costs, and thus the cost for this category would be 0. The cost of integration and interconnection costs for distributed energy resources should not be reduced in recognition that only a portion of its output is exported to the grid, as claimed by Witness Beach. For any exported power in excess of that used by the customer, the full integration and interconnection costs will be applied. For energy used by the customer, 0 integration and interconnection costs will be applied. Lastly, Witness Beach claims that marginal line losses are greater than average line losses by over 50%. This lacks merit. The study that the company has in process will determine the actual marginal line losses associated with customer generator facilities. In our calculation of marginal line losses, DESC assumes that marginal line losses for distribution are 100% higher than average line losses, and for marginal transmission line losses, average line losses are used. DESC's transmission is configured as a network. Therefore, the transmission marginal losses are approximately equal to average losses. In conclusion, the company respectfully requests that the Commission approve the calculation of the total value of net energy metering distributed energy resources as set forth in my direct testimony. This concludes the summary of my rebuttal testimony.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Furtick and Mr. Neely are available for questioning from the parties in the Commission.
Thank you, sir. Cross-examination. Attorney Elliott?
None, thank you, sir.
Office of Regulatory Staff?
None, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Attorney Mixon?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do have some questions for Mr. Neely.
All right, the floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Neely, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Good afternoon, yes.
Great. I'm not able to see you on the screen, but I think that there we go. Thank you. So Mr. Neely, your testimony sets forth the company's updated figures for the total value of net energy metering, distributed energy resources. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you're asking the commission to approve the company's updated values, which are set out in table 2 of your direct testimony.
That's correct.
And you, or the company, derived those updated values using the NEM methodology, which recognizes 11 components of the overall value of solar. Is that right?
That's right.
And then that total figure, you use that to determine the NEM incentive that the company may recover from customers through the fuel clause.
That's correct.
And specifically, it gets subtracted from the retail rate paid to NEM customers, and the resulting value is what Dominion is permitted to recover as a program expense through the fuel clause. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you agree, Mr. Neely, that the lower the total value of distributed energy resources, or the lower the value of this NEM DERs, as the company determines it, the higher the amount of the NEM incentive that will be charged to all customers as a fuel expense will be?
Well, I have to clarify my answer there, because the company recovers all costs associated with net energy metering distributed energy resources. The NEM calculation only determines what portion of it is recovered as an incentive and what portion is recovered as avoided cost.
Thank you, Mr. Neely, but also all other things being held equal, as the value of distributed energy resources goes up, the portion of that incentive that the company recovers through the fuel cost goes down. Is that correct?
Well, that's, like I said, the company recovers all their fuel costs, all the net energy metering costs through the fuel clause. It's either recovered as avoided cost or incentive. So yes, as the avoided cost goes up, more is recovered through avoided cost, and less is recovered through the incentive. As the avoided cost goes down, less is recovered through avoided cost and more is recovered through incentive.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Neely. So the NEM methodology, it was originally approved in 2015, and the commission updated the calculation of some of those 11 components last year as part of the generic docket to evaluate the costs and benefits of net energy metering. Is that correct?
That's right. As I said in my summary, that was Order 2021-569 modified some of those requirements.
Yep. And that was in docket 2019-182E, right?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Neely, I'd like to direct you to tables 1 and 2 of your direct testimony, which are on pages 7 and 8. Table 1 shows Dominion's current NEM values as approved in the last fuel proceeding. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you would agree that for 6 of the 11 components comprising the value of solar, Dominion set a 0 value. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So now turning to page 8 in table 2, that sets out the company's proposed values for this proceeding for both the current period and over a 20-year levelized period. Is that right?
That's right.
And you would agree that for the current period, Dominion has again proposed 0 values for 6 of the 11 components in the value stack.
For the current period, that's true.
And for the long-term period, it has only populated 1 additional component, and that's avoided capacity costs. Is that right?
That's not correct.
Could you explain?
Well, we've actually added avoided capacity and avoided T&D capacity.
Mr. Neely, I stand corrected. I've populated 2 additional components. I am going to pull up order 2021-296A, and that is, that's the commission's final order in last year's Dominion fuel proceeding. Let me see if this will work. Okay, Mr. Neely, are you able to see that?
Well, I can see it, but I can't read it.
Would it be helpful if I zoomed in?
It certainly couldn't hurt.
Let me know if you're having a hard
Yeah,
time.
keep on going. I'm an old guy.
I apologize. We have a fair bit of looking at these orders to do on the screen. I'm happy to assist if you're having a hard time reading anything. This order, as you can see on page 57 here, that was issued on May 7th, 2021. Do you agree with that?
That looks correct, yes.
Okay. And to the extent you're able, I guess, are you able to read the highlighted text? If not, I can read it, and you can let me know if that sounds familiar to you from your familiarity with this order.
Yeah, you probably should get it a little bit bigger. It's going to take me a while to read it. But maybe I can read it up here. It's not really any better.
Ooh. Okay.
Now you're talking.
Okay. Could you read the highlighted text? And this is at the bottom of page 57 in order 2021-296A.
The net energy metering methodology established in order number 2015-194 is approved to use in this docket. However, if the net energy metering valuation methodology currently established in order number 2015-194 changes with the issuance of the Commission's final order in the generic docket regarding the net energy metering docket number 2019-182-E, DESC shall recalculate the DER incentive and other components which may change as a result of this order. DESC shall file, Commission and shall file its recalculation with the Commission and shall provide the recalculations of the recalculations to the parties in this docket at the time that the parties may propose next steps to account for any differences.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Neely, and I apologize for that being hard to read. So you'd agree that the Commission, in its order in the fuel docket last year, said the Dominion would be required to recalculate its net values to the extent that those changed as a result of the order in the generic docket.
Right, and that's what we have done in this docket. We've recalculated these values and refiled them.
Thank you, Mr. Neely. So I'm going to pull up the order in the generic docket, which is order number 2021-569. You're familiar with this order, correct?
I am.
Okay, and this order was issued on August 19th, 2021, which was after the Commission's order in the 2021 Dominion fuel proceeding. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to highlight a couple of the Commission's findings, starting with page 34 of this order. Mr. Neely, do you see where, and I can zoom in on this again as well, do you see where the order states that the Commission adopts a standard where electric utilities in utilizing the order number 2015-194 valuation methodology bear the burden of showing why a zero value is justified and why it is not practical or feasible to provide the analysis required.
I have read the order, and I can't read what's on the screen very well, but I think that's pretty consistent with the order.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Neely. Just a couple of sentences down on that same page. Do you recall that the commission also, or that the order also states that the commission requires electrical utilities to use best efforts and best practices to populate each category of value in the order number 2015-194 methodology as modified here in all future proceedings where this analytical framework is utilized?
That was a mouthful. So yes, we have looked at every value, and we have justified every value that we put in the value stack.
Thank you, Mr. Neely. But again, do you recall that the order requires that the utilities use best efforts and best practices to populate each of those categories?
We have populated each category accurately, and so I would say we have the best values in each category.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Neely. We're going to spend some time going through some of those specific components now. So I am going to go to another portion in this generic, this order in the generic docket, because I want to start by talking with you about the company's valuation of avoided transmission and distribution costs. Mr. Neely, are you aware that in the generic NEM docket that both CCL witness Beach and the Office of Regulatory Staff witness Brian Horry recommended that utilities be required to populate the avoided transmission and distribution component with a non-zero value?
I'll have to take your word for that. I don't have that in front of me.
Okay. Well, Mr. Neely, I take it you're still not able to see the screen that I'm sharing. Is that accurate?
It's all the way across the room, so it makes it pretty difficult to read.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll read very quickly from page 43 of this order. I'll kind of focus on witness Brian Horry for ORS. He states here that, assumptions of zero transmission distribution capacity value for net energy metering solar should be revised, and a system average non-zero value be included in the marginal cost analysis to inform any new NEM rates. Does that sound familiar to you?
Yeah, and also that in that same order, the commission said if the utility doesn't have the data to do the calculation, they should file a plan to come up with the data. And on November 17th of 2021, we filed our T&D avoided costs and line loss plan. And so that's an important piece of that docket. And also, if you'll notice in the 20-year value of solar stack that we do have a T&D avoided cost, and we calculated, we looked to calculate both the current period and the 20-year period, but there's no load growth in the current period, and so it's impossible to calculate a avoided T&D cost related to load growth when there's no load growth. So we have calculated each value, current period and 20-year period. The current period is zero. That's the appropriate calculation. And in the 20-year period, we've calculated a value of 0.01838 per kilowatt hour.
Thank you, Mr. Neely. We will we'll get there very shortly. I did want to note. So, are you aware that in that order, it includes testimony again from ORS witness Brian Horry, citing to a survey that noted that over 20 states and regions do calculate avoided transmission and distribution costs from DERs and also the methodologies that they use?
Like I said, we did calculate avoided T&D costs for this docket, so I'm not sure what your point is.
Well, but the company's value is zero, is that right?
The value for the current period is zero. The 20-year period is what I said just a few minutes ago.
Okay.
We calculated
Thank you,
both
Mr.
values, and the value calculated for current period is zero.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Neely. I want to go again to, so you mentioned some of the portions of the commission's order about the granularity of data required to calculate avoided T&D costs. Commission finding number 20 in that order says that while not all utilities possess the granularity of data that's needed to provide high confidence quantification of avoided T&D value, and I'm going to shorten some of this for brevity, there are techniques accepted across the utility industry for recognizing the avoided T&D values of DER. It is appropriate to require such a technique or method to quantify the long-term impacts of the aggregate customer generator fleet on avoided transmission and distribution costs. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And just one more very quickly. So on page 44 of that same order, this is in the commission's conclusions about avoided transmission and distribution costs. The commission concludes that avoided transmission and distribution may have a non-zero value, and that the electrical utility should make a greater effort to quantify a value using a methodology that accounts for the relative availability of and granularity of data about the distribution and transmission system. Does that sound familiar?
I think that's why we filed our T&D avoided costs and line loss plan.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Neely. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. There we go. So on page 11, and this is on lines 4 through 6 in your direct testimony, you state that for the current period, the company's NEM distributed resources do not avoid either transmission or distribution capacity. And so again, the value of that component is zero, correct?
Yes.
Did you provide any additional explanation for that zero value in your direct testimony, or was that the only place that you addressed it?
I think I provided additional information in my rebuttal testimony.
And thank you. So in your rebuttal testimony, you provided an additional sentence to explain this zero value, and this is on, I believe, page 8 of your rebuttal testimony, and you state there's no avoided transmission and distribution cost in the current period because there's no load growth in the current period. Is that right?
That's correct.
Mr. Neely, am I correct that this statement refers to load growth at the system level for Dominion?
That's right.
And it's looking only at the current period, right?
Well, we haven't had load growth on the system for quite a while now.
Right, but the period for the current period, that's calendar year 2022, is that
2022, that's correct.
Okay, so 1 year.
Yes.
Okay. And so the company's position is that distributed resources cannot avoid transmission and distribution costs for the utility unless there is forecasted load growth over that very specific and short time period.
It's impossible to calculate avoided T&D costs associated with load growth if there's no load growth. And so we calculate the 20-year T&D avoided cost based on the 20-year load growth for the 20-year period.
Thank you, Mr. Neely. Well, so avoided costs, by definition, those are costs that the utility does not have to spend. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You don't dispute that customer solar systems and distributed solar systems, especially when they're considered in the aggregate, those can help reduce the company's peak demand, and particularly during peak summer hours. Is that correct?
It sounds like you've changed your topic from T&D avoided cost to capacity avoided cost.
This is just kind of a general note at this point, Mr. Neely.
Right. So the avoided costs are costs that can be avoided. Some of the costs would be at peak for depending on the resource. Customer generators typically use all of their generation at the peak, and they don't provide any reduction in peak during the winter period.
Okay. But I mean, to your point, the energy that those customers consume behind the meter during those periods, that avoids higher loads being placed on the company's transmission and distribution system. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's what's captured in our avoided energy cost.
Okay. And so isn't the effect of those reduced loads, again, considered in the aggregate and over time, to reduce the overall strain on the company's T&D infrastructure, thus deferring or avoiding what might have been otherwise necessary upgrades?
Well, if those costs could be avoided, yes, but we're talking about the 2022 period. There's no load growth. The calculation is zero. Even if we could have calculated something, there's no way for those T&D costs to be avoided. You can't avoid them at this, for this year. They're already sunk costs.
Thank you, Mr. Again, we'll get to that in just a second. I mean, so there are a lot of reasons why load may stay the same or even decrease in the company's territory over a period as short as a year. Isn't that right?
Yes.
So for instance, an economic recession or a year with milder than expected weather, both of those could reduce or eliminate load growth temporarily, right?
Those would definitely reduce loads. I'm not sure that you would say they'd reduce load growth, but they would reduce loads in that particular period.
Okay. If customers in a given year were to invest in higher than expected levels of distributed energy resources like rooftop solar or energy efficiency, demand side management measures, that could also keep loads down, could it not?
It definitely would.
And again, those distributed energy resources, they would still reduce demand and strain on the company's transmission and distribution infrastructure during that time period, would they not?
And that's why we calculated avoided T&D cost. And that's why the 20-year period has a T&D void cost, because those reductions would occur and would reduce the need for T&D.
Right, but so I guess my point is that even over a year where there isn't load growth, DERs are still working to avoid potential future costs to the company, are they not?
They are, and that is captured in the avoided energy cost. The reduction in loads are calculated.
We're talking only here about avoidable transmission and distribution.
Right.
Investments.
Yes. And we don't calculate any avoided T&D costs in the current period, but in the 20-year period, we calculate a avoided T&D cost.
Yes. So let's say that there's been this year where, again, there was no load growth. If load growth resumed, that could mean, or the existence of DERs on the company system over that prior year when there was no load growth. That could still mean that the company may have to spend less on its transmission and distribution infrastructure upgrades to accommodate the load growth that happens in the following year. Isn't that right?
If the DER reduced loads, then the T&D could be reduced. If it could be avoided, it has to be avoidable. It's not just that it's you reduce the loads, you have to be able to avoid the T&D, not just recognize that loads were less. If it's not avoidable T&D, then it can't be avoided.
Yep, and I do have a question about that again in a moment, but I want to make sure that I'm kind of clear on this. So, in other words, even during that short 1 year period where there was no load growth, DERs were still providing a benefit to the company's transmission and distribution infrastructure that could prevent or defer the need for more upgrades or maintenance later on. Isn't that correct?
Theoretically, that's true. Our transmission distribution people are not going to build the transmission system as if those customers are always generating, because they're not. It's an intermittent resource, and we have to be able to provide power to those customers whether they're generating or not.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Neely. I'll get to this in just a second. So, but again, the company's value for the current period, which is 1 year with no expected load growth, is zero.
The
Even
T&D,
though those resources may be providing benefits to the company's transmission distribution infrastructure over that year.
that's right.
Okay. Now, so even assuming, as the company did in its calculation, that avoided transmission and distribution costs are dependent entirely on load growth over the short term here, the current period. You said the Dominion looked at whether there would be load growth only from the system level. Isn't that right?
That's right.
Okay, but there may be portions of the distribution system where there is load growth expected to occur, right?
It's possible, but we don't have granularity of data that would allow us to calculate that. Hopefully, with our T&D avoided cost plan and line loss plan, we'll be able to identify if there are at the distribution level some of those circuits that could have higher or lower avoided T&D costs as well as line losses.
Okay, so you don't dispute that DERs could avoid distribution costs in those areas where there was, in those distribution pockets where there was load growth.
I'm sorry, ask the question one more time.
So do you dispute that DERs could avoid distribution costs in those areas where there was load growth on the company system?
Well, we don't have information down to that level to be used to calculate that.
Yep. We looked at the language or talked about the language in order number 2021-569 earlier. Do you recall that order stated that even where utilities don't have high granularity data, that there are a variety of techniques accepted across the utility industry for recognizing the avoided transmission distribution values of DERs?
And we use a method to calculate avoided T&D costs.
But again, Mr. Neely, the value that you quantified was zero for the current period.
Only for the current period. For the 20-year period, we did calculate avoided T&D costs using our method.
Did Dominion review or consider employing any of those techniques accepted across the utility industry to calculate a non-zero value for avoided transmission distribution over the review period?
We believe that our method was met the requirements of the orders, and it's a method that we've used for a number of years, and we use the method that we are accustomed to.
So the utility did not change the method that it used after the commission issued its order in the generic docket?
We applied a method. If you look at last year's costs, we didn't apply any method to the avoided T&D costs for this 7 value of DER stack. We looked at the order. It said use a method to quantify the avoided T&D costs. We applied a method. We use that method. We include the results of that method in our table.
Well, Mr. Neely, do you recall, again, we discussed the order in the generic docket earlier. It didn't just specify that the utility should use any method. Do you recall that it says that the utility should employ best practices and best efforts to populate each category in the NEM value stack with a non-zero value.
Yes, and that's exactly what we did.
So it's your contention that it is a utility best practice to look only at 1 year of load data, and if there's no load growth during that single year, to assign a zero value for avoided transmission and distribution costs.
For the current period only. We're talking about 2022.
Yes, correct. I think, do you agree? Mr. Beach's contention is that the utility should have used a non-zero value for the current period.
I understand that that's his contention.
Okay, and your rationale from your testimony, if I'm understanding it correctly, is that because there was no system level load growth during the current period, or will be no load growth forecasted, that there's a zero value or should be a zero value for avoided transmission and distribution costs.
Right. It has to be costs that can be avoided.
Right.
If there's no load
Mr.
growth,
Could
there's no load growth, then the T&D cost associated with load growth must be zero. If there was no load growth for 20 years, the T&D avoided cost associated with load growth would have to be zero.
Well, so Mr. Neely, could you provide an example of an organization or entity that states that using only 1 year of load data is a best practice for the industry for purposes of even calculating avoided T&D costs for a particular year?
Well, all of the costs in the left column are based on 1 year's worth of costs, 1 year's worth of data. That's the direction for populating that left column in the table is to use current period data. So if there's no T&D cost that can be avoided in the current period, then the avoided cost in the current period is zero. And if there's no load growth, there can be no T&D costs associated with load growth, and so there can be no T&D avoided costs associated with the current period.
Mr. Neely, you're aware that there are many utilities that use multiple years of load data to determine avoided transmission and distribution cost values for DERs for a single year.
Mr. Chairman, I have an objection. She's asking the witness to answer a question on assumed facts that are not in evidence in this matter. Not believe that SACE or CCL put forth any evidence in their testimony that sets forth the methodologies of other companies and how they calculate the current, by the way, 1 year period, current year period for this factor. So I don't believe the witness can answer a question based on evidence not in the record.
Mr. Chairman, I can rephrase the question.
Okay, objection sustained. Go ahead with rephrasing the question.
Mr. Neely, are you aware of any other utility that attempts to calculate avoided transmission and distribution costs by looking only at 1 year of load data?
I'm not aware of the methods used by other utilities.
Okay, so the company has not reviewed any of the other techniques that accepted across the utility industry for recognizing those values.
We have confidence that we have accurately calculated the avoided T&D cost for both the current period and the 20-year period.
So the company is asserting that its method is best practice, but it has not reviewed any other utility practices. Is that correct?
We believe that we've done the best job at calculating the avoided T&D costs on our system, with our system resources, with our system load growth and history. We believe we've calculated the best avoided T&D costs for the current period and the 20-year period.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Neely. I do want to ask one question. So in calculating the long-term avoided T&D value, your testimony states that the company looked at what projects that it had planned over that 5-year, within its 5-year budget, and then identified which were related to load growth and which weren't, and then which were avoidable. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Did the company consider whether that list of planned projects might have been larger, but for the existence of distributed energy resources on the company system?
I think just the opposite is probably true, that the DER on the system would actually create the need for more projects for reliability, not less projects.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Neely. So I want to move on to avoided capacity. Witness Beach critiqued the company's avoided generation capacity costs for both the current and the long-term periods. For the current period, Dominion again proposes zero value for avoided generation capacity. Is that correct?
I have to adjust my mind here. For avoided capacity costs, yes, there is zero value. We don't have any capacity need on the system until the coal plants are assumed to retire in 2028. So there's no avoided capacity. There's no need for capacity. There's no capacity that can be avoided in the current period.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Neely. And so in 2028, the reason you say that a capacity need will arise then is because that's when Dominion plans to retire 1,294 megawatts of coal generation. Is that right?
Well, I wouldn't say that we plan to retire those megawatts, but that is the most recent resource plan in the most recent IRP. And so that's the plan that was used to calculate avoided capacity costs.
Thank you. And so according to the company's 2021 IRP update, which is the most recent IRP filing from the company under that plan, they propose to replace that coal generation with new gas generation. Is that right?
That's correct.
And specifically, it is a 553 megawatt combined cycle plant and a 523 megawatt large frame combustion turbine. That totals 1,076 megawatts. Does that sound correct to you?
That's right.
Okay. So you agree that when the company retires those coal plants in 2028, that will create a capacity need on the system? Or
yes.
were the company to retire them in 2028?
Yes.
Okay. So in other words, would the retirement of those units cause the company's system capacity to drop below what it needs to provide reliable service?
Yes.
And that in turn creates a capacity need that the company's plan would meet with new natural gas resources.
That's Resource Plan 8 from the IRP, yes.
Right. So Witness Beach points to the company's combustion turbine replacement plan as described in the company's most recent IRP filing and in the company's filings in docket number 2021-93E as evidence that the company, in fact, has an immediate need for new capacity. I just want to kind of make sure we're clear on some of the details of that combustion turbine replacement plan. And so I'm going to pull up the 2021 IRP. This is, I think, probably another document you're going to have a hard time reading. Let me see if I can zoom in very closely. This is on page 20 of Dominion's 2021 IRP update. Under that combustion turbine replacement plan, the company intends to replace 10 of its aging combustion turbine units and an associated gas-fired steam boiler with 5 new aeroderivative CT units. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the company plans for the earliest of those to go into service in 2023. Is that right?
That's correct.
And am I correct that under that plan, the company would retire 362 megawatts total of those CT units, and would add 405 megawatts of replacements.
I can't confirm the exact numbers.
Subject to check.
Subject to check.
And that would be an additional 43 megawatts of capacity. Does that sound right to you?
Say it again, 43?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So in your rebuttal testimony, oh, I think I forgot to share my screen a moment ago. I apologize. In your rebuttal testimony, on page 5, you claim that the CT replacement plan should not be considered in calculating avoided capacity because those CT replacements are in-kind replacements and are not intended to provide additional capacity. Is that right?
That's right.
So I want to kind of start with your argument that these are in-kind replacements. So let's go back to Dominion's Resource Plan 8, which would retire 1,294 megawatts of coal generation in 2028. If the company just replaced those units with a similar amount of newer, more efficient coal plants, are you saying that Dominion would have no need for new capacity in 2028?
I'm sorry, you need to ask that question again. We're going to replace the coal plants with new coal plants?
Correct. Would that mean that the company then wouldn't have a need for new capacity in 2028 anymore?
Well, that's a much different scenario than the CT plan. Those CTs in the CT plan have critical and reliability function that the system must have, and DER will never provide those critical and reliability functions that those CTs that are being included in that CT plan will be required to have. DER will never have black start capability. They'll never have quick start capability. They'll never be dispatchable. So those the combustions in the CT plan should not be included in the calculation of avoided capacity.
Thank you, Mr. Neely. But so let's just focus on capacity for the time being. We'll get to some of those other functions here in a minute, I think. But so I'm going to kind of re-ask the question again. If Dominion were to retire its coal generation in 2028 and do an in-kind replacement with a similar amount of new coal plants, are you saying that Dominion would not have a need for new capacity in 2028?
If the decision was made to replace the existing coal plants with new coal plants, there would be no need for new capacity. We'd have exactly the same capacity that we had to start with.
Okay, so it's your position that Dominion could avoid ever having a need for new capacity so long as it just did in-kind replacements of its existing units?
Well, if the commission were willing to allow us to qualify those new plants as in-kind replacement, but they're not going to allow us there's a limit to that in-kind replacement. The CT plan, those units qualify for that in-kind replacement, but everything wouldn't. There's not the same level of need for other types of resources. Resources other than coal plants could be used to replace coal plants. It doesn't have to be coal plants, but you can't replace units that have critical and reliability function with units that don't have critical and reliability function. So that's the in-kind replacement that's required there.
So, Mr. Neely, you mentioned that the in-kind replacement isn't available for all types of resources. So you would agree, wouldn't you, that the existence or non-existence of a capacity need on the company system, like that's a factual issue. Right? The company either needs more capacity or doesn't, right?
And we don't need any capacity until 2028.
Right. Again, as a general matter, that's a factual determination, right? It's just the company does need new capacity or it does not. Is that right?
We are meeting our reserve margin until 2028 when those coal plants are retired.
Okay, so I guess your answer a moment ago about in-kind replacement seemed to kind of refer to the regulatory process associated with these types of replacements. The regulatory process, like that might affect maybe the type of resource being considered to meet a capacity need, or possibly the speed in which that could be deployed, but it wouldn't affect whether that need existed at all, right?
Yeah, you've asked a complicated question there that I'm not sure I followed you. But the point that you're trying to make is we should have included the CT plan turbines in the avoided capacity calculation, and no, we should not have, because those are critical and reliability functioning units that have to be replaced with critical and reliability function units, and distributed energy resources cannot replace that criticality or that reliability. So they should not have been included, and they weren't included in my avoided capacity calculation. They shouldn't have been included in Beach's avoided capacity calculation. It's not appropriate.
Well, so Mr. Neal, I think right now I'm actually trying to make a much smaller point than that, which is your position is that because for the CT replacement plan, they are in-kind replacements.
But that's not the only statement that I made.
Well, let's again just focus on that one for the time being.
No, let's don't, because I don't think
That
that's
there's no
appropriate.
additional capacity.
I don't think that's appropriate to just focus on that one statement. You have to understand the whole reason for those CTs that we're replacing, and what we're replacing, and why we're replacing them, and what they can be replaced with. It's not appropriate to try to use those CT plan turbines in the calculation of avoided capacity.
Mr. Neely, Attorney Mixon, we're going to take a 15-minute recess. I'm going to ask the witnesses to answer the questions that are asked. I'm going to ask the lawyers to accept whatever answers that the witnesses give, and if you have something to impeach the witness with, present it and move through your examination. We're in recess until 4:30. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We're here in docket number 2022-2-E. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioners Justin Williams, Mike Caston, Carolee Williams, Hedden Thomas, Delton Powers, and Florence Belzer. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioner Thomas Urban. Attorney Mixon. How much longer do you have in your cross-examination?
Depending on, how quickly we're able to move through, my guess is probably at least another half an hour.
All
maybe
right.
A little bit longer.
Okay, we're in recess until tomorrow morning at 10:30. Before we recess for the day, are there any questions, concerns from the parties? No?
None from the company.
All right, gentlemen, you're still on the oath. We'll see, witnesses, you're still on the oath. We will see everyone in the morning at 10:30.